Whether you've got a small, simple website or you've got a very complicated software platform in the cloud, those principles, everyone should be following. And all of us as website visitors and software, consumers would be much happier as a result.
Right. If you're not doing it, someone else is. Right. So your customers can easily go there, right? Hello and welcome to another Marketing Sherpa case study. I'm Daniel Burstein, Senior Director of Content and Marketing here at Marketing Sherpa and MECLabs Institute. And today we're going to dive into a more technical case study, and this one is sponsored by SourceFuse. We're going to be talking about how a software company leveraged Amazon Web Services to improve customer experience and enable user growth. And joining me today to talk about that is Wes Benwick, Vice President of Software Architecture at Bluhorn, and Kelly Dyer, the CEO of SourceFuse. Thanks for joining us today, Wes and Kelly.
Thanks, Dan.
So first, let me dive in and get a sense of what is Bluhorn and how does it serve a customer?
Bluhorn, in its simplest form, is a media buying platform designed to help media buyers who buy broadcast or non-broadcast mediums place buys, analyze them, figure out the most efficient buy possible, and then be able to make that order happen as quickly as possible.
Okay, it's probably a software product, so how it's running is very important to the customer, right?
Correct. It's in the cloud, and speed is of the essence. Media buying tends to be a very last-minute sport.
Okay, and then Wes, we heard your title in software architecture sounds very technical, but give us a sense, what do you do day to day? What are you involved in at Bluhorn?
I'm involved in all aspects of the company, from the feature development and roadmap for the software, as well as the sales and marketing. I'm meeting with customers probably every day, if not once, 2 or 3 times, making sure that we stay very connected to what they want. Bluhorn is a very customer-focused platform. The features we're developing are being asked for by our customers, and we're trying to push those capabilities and upgrades and updates out the door as quickly as we can to make sure the software works exactly the way they want it to.
So I'm sure everyone watching can relate to that, whether they're on the more technical side, whether they're in marketing. Having a product that's customer-focused and serves customers makes the marketing easier at the end of the day, right?
It really does. So we are very much a customer-centered or agency-centric buying platform.
Okay, so let's go back. Well, obviously we're going to talk about a success because that's why we're here, but let's go back to the beginning. What challenges was Bluhorn facing? What were you trying to dig out of?
Well, when we first really brought Bluhorn to market, it was sort of a reincarnation of a previous software that was client-server based, old architecture, very old web technology, and we kind of brought it into the modern world. And it was a 2-man operation, maybe 2.5-man operation. I was the chief cook and bottle washer. So I was doing the coding, the development, and helping with the sales and marketing of it. And it was a great opportunity to really connect with customers because I was speaking directly with customers every day on what they wanted and then making the software work the way they really needed it to afterwards. And that really powered our growth. We had, our customer service and response time was measured in minutes, not hours. And our customers have grown used to that. As we grew, keeping up with that scale is not possible. So we've brought some additional people in, so that's obviously a learning curve issue. And we were trying to figure out how to take some of the development effort off of me so that I could focus more on the overall architecture, the strategic direction of the company, and look at some of the advanced integrations that we wanted to do. And so that was one of the pain points. And then also figure out how to grow the company with the tools that we had without having to go out and raise venture capital or invest lots of money, which we really weren't equipped to do. We wanted to grow a little bit more organically and take advantage of social media was another challenge for us.
So technically speaking, what was the customer experience like? Was it the customer experience you wanted customers to have, or were there any gaps there that was lagging?
At the beginning, I'd say, with the handful of customers we had, it was perfect. Like we knew our customers on a first name basis. I could identify them by their phone number and by their voice. So it was great. But there's that gap from those first handful of customers that were loyal to you. They had been with the software before. They were willing to work with the issues that arise when you're trying to develop and migrate software over to where we ended up today. And with SourceFuse, there's several gaps really that we crossed. And there have been times that the customer experience was not what we wanted. The software performance was slow. The development cycle wasn't as fast as we wanted it to be. So we've kind of ridden that wave up and down.
Okay, so Kelly, when you came in with SourceFuse, What did you see was going on with how Bluhorn was hosted, and what were you looking to change to enable that scalability and reliability?
Yeah, I mean, there's first of all, there's a common challenge if going from the individual developer, small team, to having some success and needing to scale, and then realizing there's bottlenecks everywhere. So it happens a lot, and when it's software that is traditional architecture, so a server somewhere at a data center, and your database and your website and your application are all on the same machine, right? And so if it's slow down, we'll add more, bigger machine, and that's kind of the scaling process there. But with newer technology, breaking into the cloud and using AWS and things like microservices, and how you split up your application and put the proper pieces in the proper places is kind of how you address that and set it up to grow into that future scale. So in looking at the initial Bluhorn application when we came in, it was in that monolithic state where it's all together. And so you're realizing these bottlenecks where everything's backing stuff up in the database or the web traffic, and you can't even identify the bottlenecks until you kind of structure it differently and move it to the cloud, break up the application in the way it should be so you can actually start to identify these and optimize each area individually. So that's kind of at a high level what we look at when we come in at first, is how segregated or containerized is the application, and or is it just one big, are we able to even diagnose it at this point or not? And that was kind of the starting point. So the first step is to come in and look at how to break that up. How do we migrate this to an environment that's going to be conducive to scaling? That's the first step. Before you talk about just scale it, first you kind of put it on the right infrastructure so that you can get it ready to do that.
Right, and Bluhorn was already in the cloud, right? So it's not almost even just taking it from a server and putting it in the cloud, but it's taking it from the cloud and getting it set up the right way? You mentioned splitting it up in different ways and not just having it in one place?
Yeah, exactly. So on a server in the cloud, everything's in the cloud, right? Everything on the internet is technically the cloud. But when we're talking like AWS specifically, there's Amazon Web Services, there's the concept of services and how you split up these components into their own their own machines or virtual machines, rather than one server. So a server in a data center is one thing, but when you move to AWS and you split it up, so what we look at and initially did was the database, right? The database is broken out on Amazon, it's called RDS, the Relational Database Service, but really it gives you a tool where you can migrate, does it for you almost when you're migrating the data as a first step. Now you have a database itself separate from the other aspects of your server. It's not one server, not one machine, it's a database service that's running your database. Then you move your processing, your application, to what they call EC2, which is a server that they can scale those up and down as much as you need based on the server activity. You can scale the database up and down based on the database activity. And you can put storage in what Amazon calls S3, but it's just where you put your files on Amazon, and that can scale up and down based on your storage. So rather than one server that we just at a data center in a cloud somewhere that we just need a bigger server, now you can identify when you break it up, the application's running in one place, the database is running on a database component, and your storage is in your storage component, and you can wrap it all in a really private layer, which we can talk about some privacy and security things that are big factors too. But now you have everything split up into these other services, these microservice areas, and you can start to identify which one which one's really bearing the load. So you can actually increase resources there and then decrease resources on your database if that's not the problem, or increase it if that's the problem. You have a lot more levers to pull by splitting the application up into services instead of one big server in that sense.
Great. So as we get more technical here, it might help the marketers watching not necessarily know how to do it yourself, but here's some trigger words and know what you should be asking your tech team, your dev team, or your vendors about. And one thing specifically to look out for, I know, Wes, you mentioned that there was a specific problem around the aliases you had that were really slowing you down. You want to explain that, what people can look out for with that?
Sure. We learned a number of things in this process. One was just as simple as knowing your different domains. A lot of software, ours included, we had a .com and a .net. And at some point along the way, but we forgot we used the .com. That was not really something we advertised. Yet we had a couple customers still using it, really not in an unsupported sense, but we just weren't even aware. And when we migrated, we missed that step. And that's something that it cost a couple customers some downtime, just because we didn't know that what they knew, and we had to get them moved over, and we had to bring their data over separately. And that's all part of a migration strategy that is important to our operation, but that was a one-time and hopefully never have to do it again type moment. We've been through those migrations twice prior to coming and working with SourceViews.
Okay. So now Kelly talked a lot about the services and how it was all switched, but what does that mean from a business perspective? What does that mean to the customer experience, how the new hosting?
I think what I hear from Kelly, and coming from a technical background myself, is scalable and scalability means a lot of things to a lot of people. And we thought we had a scalable system before, and to our customers it means that as we grow, their performance won't suffer. So I've been part of other software on the consumer side where they started growing, and all of a sudden what we enjoyed speed-wise, performance-wise, support-wise, it changed as they got to a certain point and they couldn't maintain that level of support or level of service or performance anymore of their platform. And it was really important to me from the get-go that we built a system that wouldn't have those problems. And of course, when you do that, you end up with those problems, I guess. And we've learned some lessons about it. So what this really taught me, as much as I thought I knew about cloud computing and scalability, there's definitely a lot of different forms and ways to make a platform scale. And it turns out SourceFuse and what they brought knowledge-wise to the table for Amazon Web Services was priceless in terms of what we needed to be able to get to the next level.
You mentioned a great analogy that I think a lot of marketers relate to. The scalability was similar to like PPC advertising, where you can ramp it up and get more traffic. Is that what you found?
In a way, it lets us take advantage of that. So, our development effort works in sprints, and we do our marketing in sprints. So, coming from a development background, I like to employ some of the things that we've learned on the development side into our marketing, and we like to work in these kind of 1 or 2 week long sprints where we market after a certain or advertise towards a certain target audience heavily, be it on social media, be direct mail, what have you, and try to bring subscribers in rapidly, and then spend the next couple weeks onboarding them and analyzing our results and deciding where we want to go for our next marketing sprint, the same way we look at development. Because when we're working on new features, we're working in a 1 to 2 week cycle to push out as much as we can that's quality code that users can use as quickly as possible, because I'm not a big fan of the once or twice a year release cycle where you have to wait for the next big version number. We don't. We might have version numbers internally, but we don't share version numbers with our customers. They're expecting a continuous cycle of updates.
So does that sprint fashion for marketing work well in terms of, okay, making sure you get a bunch of new customers coming in, okay, it works before we go through our next round of new customers?
I think it does, and it allows us to target certain types of customers so that we're not always bringing in the same type, but we're able to target ones that we think will make best use of our current feature set, especially if it's something new that we've just rolled out. We've done some integrations with Nielsen and with ComScore, and so when we have those, we go after customers that we think will really enjoy or be able to benefit from those features, and I think that's worked really, really well for us.
Okay, so Kelly, as Wes was mentioning, scalability, right? That could just be a buzzword. We hear that thrown around a lot.
Right.
So for the marketers out there, what are some of the questions they should be asking, or dev teams or vendors, to really understand how scalable their product is? Imagine there's a cost trade-off there in some level, right?
There's always a cost, yeah. I mean, and with every system has a bottleneck somewhere. That's just definition of systems, right? There's some component that's going to be have the least amount of capacity or scalability to it. So if it's all one big kind of system and you don't know, then you hit that cost trade-off pretty quickly, because everything's more expensive to scale. But if you've split it up properly and you know what it really costs and what the real cost driver of that is, then you can manage it, and it's much more cost-effective to scale. So the first question is, what does it look like to scale? What would it take to have 1 million simultaneous users on our website, for example? So the first question is, have we load tested for that? Have we actually hit our application with a simulated load of that many? So that's kind of a big piece of identifying where the bottleneck is. So at a baseline level is, if you haven't load tested your application or your website, that's first step is ask your team if they have, or if not, please do so. Because then you know what your limits are. And then making those limits, higher and determining that cost-benefit trade-off is actually just a matter of having the right reporting in place. So if you split up your services across the areas we were talking about earlier, and you're reporting on those individually, and then you hit it with a load test, okay, we are going to cap out at 1,000 simultaneous users, so either you fix that or you tailor your marketing campaigns to be within your load. So those are kind of but without actually doing the testing on it and being able to report on where those bottlenecks are, you're just kind of guessing. So the first step is, what have we tested for, and how do we find out what our peak is, so you don't misalign that with your marketing initiatives, and you lose money that way as well.
And I would add on to that, again, depending on who you're working with, we thought prior to even working with SourceFuse that we understood cloud computing and how to scale our system. And while we hadn't really put it through the simulations to confirm that, real life taught us different. That as we were adding customers, our system was not scaling, and we went from friendly with our previous cloud platform provider to a bit of a hostile kind of relationship, because they couldn't explain to us or help us anymore. They didn't have the data at their fingertips to tell us, was it our database causing a slowdown? Was it the way our code was written and running? Was it a bandwidth issue? We were hearing every excuse in the book. And as much as we thought we had a reliable system that was as fail-safe and foolproof as possible, real life taught us different. And we learned very quickly over one weekend that one small thing out of our control could bring a whole system down to its knees. And that's when we knew it was time to make a change. And that's why we went back to SourceFuse, who was working with us from a development standpoint at the time, and said, we need some help. We knew Amazon Web Services as a concept was the way to go, but even with 25 years of IT experience under my belt and the degrees to go with it, I was a bit intimidated by the breadth and complexity of their product offering to be able to tackle it myself, and I knew that we needed to bring in experts because we'd get it done faster and it would get done right.
Okay, so scalability is one important feature of moving to the cloud, but another important element is reliability. And I know, Wes, for your marketing funnel specifically, reliability was important because the customer was trying out the product beforehand in some way. So why don't you give us a sense of how did you decide to move from a freemium model to that 14-day free trial, and what did that mean for your infrastructure?
I guess there's a couple different ways to answer that, or a couple different answers. First, we found that moving from something where they can get some free version of it to something where they're really getting a trial or a startup period to get trained before they really, their investment begins, let's say, really helped us focus our resources on customers who were qualified and truly serious about it versus spending time on customers that were window shopping. So that was more an allocation of our own resources, trying to work with people who we knew wanted to be customers, not people who just wanted to try it out and see if maybe this was a good fit for their business or not. So I would say now when customers come on board, even though they're plugging their credit card in, they're getting those 14 days free, that's acted a little bit like a barrier of entry, filtering out the people who aren't as serious as we'd like them to be.
So higher friction, you have a higher quality customer coming through.
Exactly.
Prospect.
And then reliability at the same time is also important, because you don't want to, have a marketing sprint, adding customers left and right, and they can't access the system. I don't know too many people who are going to sign up for software if they can't access the platform to sign up for it. They're going to think something's terribly wrong here. And then once they're in, the nature of our business, and I know there's a lot of others like it, is very last minute. So there's very little patience between a media buyer and their customer and a media buyer and us. And we have to deliver 99.9% of the time. We don't have a chance to have a maintenance window. We don't get another chance to place an ad or to have them make a change. They need it ready so they can click go, start their order, and have it out to the media vendor reps, within an hour in some cases.
Yeah, and if it's a 14-day free trial, even if it's more higher committed customers, I'd imagine if it's not 100% reliable during that time, they're just going to buy something else. Right?
Correct. It's a chance for us to really put our foot forward and say, look, try it out. There's no commitment necessary in those 14 days. Cancel any time. It's like a due diligence period for them to really see if this makes sense, because you simply can't, in today's world, go out and look at software on their websites and read about it and watch enough videos to really know if it's going to be a fit. Those days just don't exist. And you have to be able to see if the software is going to fit inside your business, or if you have to fit your business towards the software. And whichever one you go with, you have to use that information to make a decision that's right for your business.
So Kelly, clearly reliability is important there. Again, another buzzword, everyone thinks their software is reliable until they find out it's not. So what are some questions you can ask on the front end to make sure you do have the reliability there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, where is it hosted, right? So if you're on your traditional just a server somewhere, is it a shared server that can go down outside of things outside of your, that you don't have any control over? So if so, get into a proper environment. That's where, for example, AWS or even just in general, a proper hosting environment is of where everything lives, so that you're minimizing external factors. So you do a big marketing campaign and your website's down or your application's down or people can't log in, it's all for nothing. You lost all those leads and customers. The other piece is how changes get deployed by your team. So do we have continuous integration and continuous development and deployment? And that'd be the question to ask internally. And what that means is, do we have a smooth release process? Like you said, you can't have time to have a maintenance window when somebody's in their trial and they have an hour to get their work done in it and it doesn't work, they're gonna leave. Right? So being able to continuously deploy software, have a proper deployment process. And what that means is you've set up the pipeline where their development team makes their changes, there's some kind of proper testing involved, and then it gets deployed automatically to the live environment with zero downtime. Because if you're regularly deploying features, following Agile, like Wes mentioned earlier, kind of rolling out features more regularly, you need to have that more streamlined, or you're having these regular outages where that one customer that is on their trial gets turned off because it was down when you're making a deployment. So that's kind of some of these, how do we deploy our changes, would be one of those questions internally, and make sure that are we using continuous integration so that we don't go down when our key customers are using the application. And the other big piece was kind of caching. How do we cache or store? Basically, it's a speed management thing. If things are slow, there's technical things to dive into, but you can't have it be slow. If somebody's experimenting and your target customer, in Wes's case, might have a ton of data to process right off the bat to make sure it's going to fit their business. Like we do a lot of buys, we need to load it all in and make sure we can get the analysis we need quickly. So if they do that and it takes 5 minutes to get a response through this data processing job, then nobody's going to wait that long. So everything needs to be fast and effective in that first touch, or you've lost those customers that are your ideal customers in some cases.
And I would throw on to the end of that reliability also means your backups as well, and just how quickly can you recover, right, when you do have downtime. So in our case, where prior to being on AWS with SourceViews or managed by SourceViews, we had some downtime over a weekend, and even though we were told by our previous vendor that scaling up and adding additional servers would be, within minutes, not hours, it turns out that one thing out of their control caused us not to be able to restore our software at all, and also at the same time not even be able to restore from a backup. So I think as part of having reliability as a major factor, in your platform, you've got to be able to use your staging sites and your secondary, test platforms to experiment with downtime and make sure you can truly bring your site back up quickly, so that you really do have that redundancy, which is another major part of the reliability equation.
It's an excellent point too, because like with load testing for scale, everybody thinks they're scalable until they hit that peak and bottleneck and it goes down, right? Everybody thinks they're reliable and have a good disaster recovery until it goes down and you realize you don't. So same way you test load, you test restores, and you go probably a regular cycle for testing your restore and recovery process. And the fact of being on something like Amazon makes it easy, because you can roll out a container and you can simulate a failure and you can restore it and then turn it all back off. And you've only paid for that amount of time you did that one test. But for a fact that you can restore in X amount of time because you've tested it and done it, not because you think you can. So that is another big piece of it, being able to quickly come back and prove it by simulating it.
You get ready beforehand for something to go wrong. So really another thing that can go wrong that we hear a lot about in the news these days is cybersecurity, some sort of hack, something there. Mm-hmm. I'd imagine us as a small company, as it's just a startup, it can be difficult to keep a handle on that. So what did you guys do in the early days and how have you evolved?
That's a great question. I'm lucky that security is important. We're not storing passwords, we're not storing credit card data. We are storing confidential information that our agency users would certainly not want to get out. And because we're a multi-tenant platform, meaning that we've got multiple agencies and customers and users who are all operating on the same code base, the same site, security has been built into our platform from day one. And what we did, and this was just my own paranoia, we built the entire code base from the ground up. We aren't using a third-party library. I personally wrote every bit of code that the foundation of the software is built off of. And I know for a fact, if there's going to be a hole, where it would be, and there's not one in our model. It doesn't mean one couldn't be found and we're always on guard, but I don't have to worry and trust someone else. And that's really, really helped us, because I can't afford to have one agency see another's data, and I certainly can't have an anonymous user out there, a hacker or someone trying to find a vulnerability, get in and access that information and use it against them, especially with some of our agency users that are doing political buys or very sensitive confidential buys, where the demographics they target and the rates they pay are extremely confidential and private. So that's something built into us in our mindset from the ground up. And security also isn't about breaching data. It's about someone just trying to deny service to a platform. And we experienced that. And I'm not sure if it was directed at Bluhorn or if it was directed at the host we were on previously, but that was one of the things that ultimately led to some of our downtime, was overutilization of resources by non-subscribers. It was a heck of a problem to have, because how do you stop that? And even with the best firewalls in place, we still couldn't keep up with the attack to be able to mitigate it, shut it down, and leave our software responsive for the users that were actually paying for it.
So what do you do about that, Kelly? What are some of the questions you can ask? Because it seems like if this can happen to some of the biggest companies in the world, how can anyone defend against it?
Right, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fundamental things, like you said, in the application layer, making sure your data is encrypted, encrypted at rest, which means in the database, and encrypted in transit, which means you're using SSL or HTTPS kind of requests for everything. So there's some fundamental that should be always in every application these days. Make sure you're doing that at a minimum. There's your environment itself, where you have, setting up firewalls. So in Amazon, you can set up your own private kind of environments, and you can limit what has access to it at all. And you're getting this whole layer of security by AWS, which is why we like mainstream providers versus a server where everything's on you to really set up a lot of these components. That whole services concept at Amazon lets you wrap it all in a container that's private with limited access, that they have very robust systems for. And you can set aside in a separate zone your other publicly available machines, and that no one can access the others directly, but you can access this directly. So how you separate your environments so that they're logically, the things you need to protect are protected, and you're leveraging this world-class platform to do it is another kind of fundamental piece. Some of the other aspects, like the AWS servers, everything by default you roll out has this shield protection, they call it. It's basically for denial of service attack. Everything's kind of monitored for a lot of those kind of standard things. It's kind of out of the box included when you're rolling out to an environment like that. So there's a lot of underlying security that you get just by using a proper hosting provider in that sense.
And is there anything you've changed internally or you can do for an insider threat? So for example, some of the big hacks we saw because someone internally just clicked on the wrong email link. Have you changed any of your processes to defending inside? Or?
Well, I actually look more at internal threats as things that employees of the company could potentially do. And one of the things that I enjoy most about our relationship with SourceFuse is that even though I'm the software architect and one of the owners of the company and can touch and feel the data and the servers, if you will, that are in the cloud, we maintain an arm's length relationship. I can't physically go in, and if I can't, no one else from the company can, and make changes to our code base. It has to go through SourceFuse's process. I can't go in and directly access the database and make a change, which as a developer and working with customers, sometimes I want to do that, to go just fix one little thing that's bothering them. But the repercussions of that could be huge. We've learned in some cases the hard way, and in some cases we just know better. So having this relationships where SourceFuse manages our operations that Amazon Web Services hosts kind of keeps us all in a bit of an arm's length triangle. No one person, right, could take the system down. And I think that's or one problem could take the system down, really. And I think that's a good thing to have. That even if we were to employ some people internally on the support side, like we do, who had some malicious intent, let's say, and kind of went through our HR filters, and we missed a clue, even they can't do anything that could potentially cause a disruption in our services.
It's like launching a missile, making sure there's two keys to turn in the process.
Exactly, and that only those people have the keys and nobody else has the keys. Exactly. So like not all these keys floating around. Yeah, exactly. That's how you separate it, even the backup environments. A lot of times people set up a back environment, they just copy all the data over. Well, you have to really scrub that and clean that when you do it, because it's still, you're exposing this information. And with GDPR out there and HIPAA compliance, depending on the industry you're in, there's a lot of compliance things where how you manage that data and who can access that data is a pretty big deal. So you make sure you set up the right controls.
Okay. So in your sales process, Wes, it's a very B2B complex sales process. You have a few big clients, and so sometimes you look to customize the product. So can you give us an example where you customize a product for a specific client?
Yeah, and I would say we're unique in that we go from the most simple of sales processes to complex. But our complex customers come to us and they have certain demands or expectations. They're coming off of a platform that has a certain feature set that we don't have, or maybe they're recently a mashed together company of several different people, experts in their field, and they want to make the software perform because they love our interface or they like what we offer. And one thing that we bring to the table is this ability to personalize and customize the software to an individual agency or business. And one of the ways we do that is our development relationship with SourceFuse is also scalable. So not only is our sales and marketing scalable, and our hardware platform in the cloud is scalable, but so is our development effort. And that's critical in meeting the needs of some very demanding, complicated customers who take media buying to a whole new level. So when they come on, let's say for the 14-day trial, and we use that period to identify where there's some deficiency, where we're not meeting their needs. They have a certain business practice or a customer that needs a certain kind of reporting or a certain integration or a certain set of calculations, whatever it might be. I'm able to look at their needs, bring it over to my development team at SourceFuse, and if we need to, we can spin up a whole new development team within days. And maybe in some cases, we could do this in hours, depending on the need, and crank out the feature set within, depending again on the complexity, 1 to 2 weeks, and roll it right into the platform. And that customer, while they might need to have a little bit of patience, it's not like they're having to wait 6 months or a year. We're able to deliver it. In some cases, we've done it in a month or less.
Okay. So we started by talking about hosting. So this is, you do the migration, it's a new host, boom, everything's moved over, all done, right? But is it a continual process? Like, what do you do after the first month or the first few months to make sure it's all working? What can you learn?
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process. In software in general, you're never building and it's done. You optimize. And so now that foundation of how we said we put it in a scalable environment, make sure it's locked down and secure with the right access controls and following an agile flow, even on the development side of how we're allowing, how we're working through features and prioritizing them. All that's in place now. A month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, you've got more users on the system because sales and marketing worked and there's more users. So now you're identifying load capacity. When on a load test, you're identifying what needs help. Where is our weak point? And so where can we save money, right? So, and for example, in AWS, if you only pay by the minute or by the hour on what you're using. And if you can predict your usage just through historical trend of what you're looking at, you can save significant amounts of money by there's a couple different instances they have or ways that you can kind of allocate how you have your environment set up that saves you a significant amount of money once you have this kind of predictable usage pattern. So optimizing that is kind of that next step after getting the foundation in place of assessing and migrating there. Now you're managing it, you're reporting on it, you're finding out where to save costs, you're making sure you're able to scale. You're rolling out features in a really controlled deployment process way that kind of makes sure everything's up and stable. So then you can get in that fast iterative flow that Wes is talking about.
And to Kelly's team's credit, when we migrated to AWS and we tested things out and we eventually pulled the trigger and moved all of our production code and customers over, a couple months later, I knew this was happening in the background, but I had moved on to bigger and other problems. His team was analyzing our software's performance, how well the code was performing, how well the database queries were acting, and they found ways to lower our costs. And I think that's the key of a really healthy relationship, is having someone, who's not afraid to tell you no when you have a bad idea or one that could be done better, but also someone who's got your back saying, hey, we don't have to spend this amount of money. It doesn't, not hurting Kelly, like it's not coming out of his pocket, it's coming out of Bluhorn's. And when you've got a partner who's thinking about your financial interests as well, that's a really, really healthy relationship that you want to maintain.
Right. Well, let's talk about some other results from this as well. So I'll just picking out one of the technical results. I saw update rating was reduced from 40 seconds to 3 seconds. So what does that mean from the customer experience perspective?
So one of the biggest things we do in media buying is we analyze a buy's ratings, the actual demographic performance of a specific set of ads against a target audience. So unlike digital, where we can see that sort of instantaneously when we talk about broadcast, we have to use ratings data from Nielsen and ComScore to forecast what a buy's potential reach might be and its frequency, and then ultimately come back and look at what it actually did. And that process is not a simple calculation. There's a lot of different data points to consider. There's lots of data we have to digest and warehouse from Nielsen and ComScore just to be able to get there. And on the previous system, when we first designed Bluhorn, we weren't going to be very performance heavy. We were going to probably be more database heavy than anything, very transactional. And what sort of happened in the natural cycle of business, we got into heavy data processing, which I didn't see us doing. And sure enough, our update rating method or logic was taking 30, 40 seconds, maybe longer in some cases. And that really shouldn't be happening because that means a user's sitting there twiddling their thumbs, unable to work. And that's the last call I want to have from someone, is someone saying, hey, you're in the cloud, like there's all this power. Why am I having to wait? No one wants to wait. No one waits 30 seconds for a Google search. And pretty much no one waits 30 seconds for anything anymore. So we needed it to be a lot more immediate. And while we're not instantaneous, the response time is way, way down for the average buy.
So it's a radically better customer experience.
It is. And if I ever was concerned that I needed to be better, it's a simple phone call or a text message to scale our performance and our core processing code and servers up. It may not have to result in the database costs increasing or the storage costs. And maybe it's temporary. Maybe it's because one customer has a really large buy in 1 month. And if we know about it, maybe we're going to do them a favor. Maybe we see a cycle. Everything in the business world and in life is a cycle of some sort. So maybe we notice over time that there's a cycle that media buying is heavier certain weeks of the month, certain times of the year, and we could actually stay ahead of the curve and scale up very, very easily, and no one would ever know the difference.
Very nice. So a lot of what we talked about, Kelly, was the basics of operations and scalability and security. Looking ahead, what do web services like Amazon make possible innovation-wise?
Yeah, I mean, there's you can tap into heavy data science tools, which for marketers or technologists or anyone running a business is pretty powerful. It's the stuff Amazon data scientists use. So whether you've got now you've got it up and you've optimized your costs and you have the ability to rapidly scale, now what can we do with this? So they have this whole machine learning stack, right? So you can apply some heavy data science to it, some business intelligence to it. You can feed all your data sets pretty easily, almost push button, into these really powerful analysis tools. So you're gonna run some deep dive in when is our media buying heaviest and when is the usage there. You can feed a lot of data in and you can apply algorithms right out of the box on it, all within a temporary environment that you only pay for while you're using it. You can open up things like the stuff that Alexa runs on, so Lex and Polly, which is the text-to-speech and the voice acknowledgement, that kind of interaction. So you can now be omni-channel in all of your whether your text message or your email or a phone call that's automated to your customers, however you want to integrate this into your system and your workflow to make functional ways to interact with your application beyond the browser or just even the phone. You can now have Alexa commands do things in the, buy this ad or send me an Uber, and all these things that you do now. You can incorporate these really cool next level things into your application. Even if you don't even have everything there, you can temporarily take your data set on wherever you are, import it into Amazon really easily, run some analysis on it, and then learn from that, all in a temporary way, and then turn it all off, and you're not paying for it anymore. So it kind of opens up a lot of this next level interaction, whether it's in that omni-channel speaking, image recognition, so recommendation engine like Amazon is very well known for. That underlying engine is now available to you to plug into as a microservice. So if you've got data and you're trying to figure out how to recommend, or you're analyzing user images and you want to recommend other ones, all these things that are kind of next level or going on now are kind of readily available at your fingertips that you can just turn on and turn off. So it's kind of, there's a whole lot of next generation technology that you can tap into without having to build anything.
Yeah, the ability to just temporarily buy something, not make a big investment, sounds like a great opportunity for experimentation and see if there's really an ROI on something.
Exactly. Whether it's a product feature that you can tap into, or a standalone analysis you want to do, you really just experiment. And I know, that's a good way to learn. Should we actually go through the process of incorporating this into our product? And you can learn pretty quickly, if there's value in it and how much it costs, and go through the business assessment of it.
Experiment efficiently is the key word, because I can think, just 10 years ago, maybe even 5, and certainly when I first got into this 25 years ago, if you wanted to experiment with optical character recognition or some voice technologies, the amount of investment you had to make, both in hardware and training and software, you could never even do it. It was just a pipe dream. And now, especially when you're already on the platform, or if you're not, there's so much example code, so many cookbook ideas, if you will, so many quick ways to just test a concept out and prove if it's going to work or not, that it's really changing the way we look at software development. In my perspective, for Bluhorn, I'm sure it's changing a lot of other people's opinions as well.
I mean, yeah, and just outside of Bluhorn, another example that was recently featured by AWS itself was one feature we did for a local company that's in the healthcare logistics space. So without going into all the details, one aspect was 37% of their call center calls were for this one particular use case, where they were calling to verify a patient's answer. And when looking at their internal business data, we were able to see, well, we can automate that part. So we, in one sprint, rolled out a full voice-based interaction to automate the way that works and eliminate that whole call center burden, which has a direct cost savings right there of something, and in a very cheap way, automate this verification that was going on that was very manual beforehand. So it took one sprint to roll out and confirm, and now it's in the production environment. So it's pretty powerful stuff.
That's awesome. All right, well, we got pretty technical here, but let's step back at a high level before we go. Wes, what's your top piece of advice for marketers?
Well, I mean, everything that we do at Bluhorn and on the FileLogix platform is about saving people time, saving them space, saving them labor, and saving money. And I think if you focus your efforts on those things, which is what moving to the cloud and becoming more scalable is all about, then you're going to be successful. And I think, like we all know in marketing, what you measure and inspect automatically improves, and that's really what Kelly brought to the table, was not just moving us there, the knowledge and expertise of AWS and migrations, but also the knowledge to actually take that after the fact, look at all that's really happening behind the scenes, the gears, if you will, of what's really happening and driving this, and then make improvements on that, and the science behind it. That is absolutely priceless, and something that you have to do, because you've got to constantly be tweaking and improving things, or your software is going to become stale and you're not going to be relevant anymore.
Got to keep optimizing.
That's right.
That's right. Well, what about you, Kelly?
Well, the same thing, like for the marketers, and there's the technical marketers that can dive right into this themselves and actually put some hands on these things, or at a high level, if it's your team or your vendor or your strategic partner, whatever the case may be, however things get changed and evolved and developed on your website and the application itself, asking those questions. Are we load testing? Why not? Can we see them? What's our peak load as a marketer that we can do, so you can line that with our campaigns? Why do we have downtime? Why are we not continuous integration? Why are we not deploying code in a better way? Or how do we do that? How do we get there? So the concept of having to get settled for maintenance modes, you don't have to. The concept of settling for outages and slowness, you don't have to. So asking the right questions with this underlying, how things are being done now, and what can our team do to better improve these, and pushing a little further, I think is important, because it's out there and it's easily achievable.
And I think that's excellent advice, whether you've got a small, simple website or you've got a very complicated software platform in the cloud. Those principles, everyone should be following, and all of us as website visitors and software, consumers would be much happier as a result.
Right, if you're not doing it, someone else is.
Right.
So your customers can easily go there, right?
Exactly.
So, well, thank you, Wes, and thank you, Kelly, and thank you for watching this Marketing Sherpa case study sponsored by SourceViews. You can read and watch many more case studies at MarketingSherpa.com.